Kilara, 10 clicks from Rendezvous Beta.
Down! Atten yelled. Niner flung himself flat and heard Fee grunt as he did the same, the air knocked from his lungs. An airspeeder flew overhead with a deceptively gentle hum. Atten, squatting in the cover of a fallen tree, followed it with his rifle scope.
2 up, camo and custom armament,
he said.
Somehow I don't think the locals drive those. Not with mounted cannons, anyway.
The hum of engines faded. Niner struggled to his feet and regained his balance, wishing for the speeder bikes and an absence of armor. The squad was too heavily laden, and the armor wasn't designed for blending into the landscape, although it was the difference between life and death in hostile territory. Protection against blaster fire, nerve agents, and even hard vacuum. And when they got to their target, it would come into its own. The armor was designed for Fibua ops, fighting in built-up areas and inside buildings, urban warfare of the kind the galaxy now had plenty to offer. For now, they just had to make the best of the scenic part of the mission. He was tired. They all were. Not even the animal panic brought on by the risk of discovery could shake that off. They needed to sleep. Niner checked his datapad. They were still 10 clicks from RV Beta, and it was midday. It was much easier to move by night, so he wanted to press on and make the RV point by mid-afternoon, then lie up until nightfall. If Darman had made it, and maybe he hadn't, but Niner's mind was made up, they would wait for him.
He's back. Everyone down,
Atten said. The quiet drone of engines interrupted Niner's calculations. The airspeeder was heading south toward them again. They froze, mud-smeared and visible from that altitude, or so they hoped. It wasn't entirely training that produced the reaction. Aerial surveillance was especially threatening. Niner recalled the Kaminoan KE-8 Enforcer craft cruising above the training grounds of Topoka City, ready to pluck out and discipline any defective clone who didn't conform. They were equipped with electroshock devices. He'd seen a KE-8 in action just once. After that, he worked extra hard to conform.
He's on a square search,
Atten said. He was turning into an excellent point now. For some reason, he was slightly more attuned to his surroundings than Fee or even Niner himself.
He must be working out from the center. Center of what, though?
Fee asked. Niner forgot his fatigue.
You never leave your mates behind,
Niner thought to himself.
If he hasn't seen us, he's seen Darman,
Niner said.
Or what's left of him,
Atten said.
Shut it, Atten. What's your problem? I've been Darman,
Atten said. He said nothing more. Niner didn't think it was a good time to ask for an explanation. The engines were overhead. Then the sound faded a little and dropped in pitch, but soon resumed full volume.
He's circling,
Atten said.
Perfect,
Niner said, and all 3 men reached for their anti-armor grenade attachments at the same time.
What's he seen? Maybe nothing. Maybe us,
Fee said. They fell silent. The airspeeder was indeed circling. It had also dropped lower and was now about level with the tops of the trees. Niner could see its twin cannons. His helmet wasn't telling him it had locked on, but that didn't mean that it hadn't.
You can never count on tech. Best piece of gear is the eyeball.
It was the first piece of advice Skirata had ever given him. Accelerated learning was fine, but anything direct from the mouths of men who had fought real engagements left a bigger impression. Niner leveled the rifle and peered through the scope, trusting to Blast Tech Industries that the sight really wasn't reflective. He'd find out the hard way if it was. He could see the sun glinting off the human pilot's goggles. The gunner was a droid. He wondered if it felt vulnerable without any armored canopy, heads conveniently skylined for a shot. He suspected that anyone looking down from that height with a cannon or two didn't feel vulnerable at all. The fuselage banked above him and turned slowly, rising well above the trees as if the pilot was trying to get a visual fix again. It wasn't coincidence. Niner kept the DC-17 trained on the central propulsion. Then, a red flashing symbol went off in his visor. The thing had a lock on him. He squeezed the trigger. The white-hot blast kicked his visor into blackness for an instant, and the detonation was so close that the shockwave hit him like a body blow. He scrambled to his feet and ran. How he ran more than 50 kilos of dead weight on his back, he would never know. But adrenaline could do remarkable things. His instinct was to get clear before debris rained down on him. Armor and bodysuits could withstand a lot, but the human instinct buried deep inside him screamed, "Get clear." When he stopped, he had covered 100 meters, even in the tangled undergrowth of the coppice. He was panting like a mott, and the suit was struggling to cool him down. Behind him, a fire burned, with smaller flames scattered around it like seedlings around a tree. He turned to look for Fee and Atten. His first thought was that he had brought the speeder crashing down on them.
Did you have to?
Fee was right next to him. He hadn't heard him above the noise of his own breathing.
He got a lock on me,
Niner said, feeling relieved, and then oddly guilty, but not sure why.
I know. I saw your DC go up, and I thought I'd better get moving or I'll be wearing a speeder. Atten? Can't hear him.
That didn't mean anything. The close-range comm setting was only 10 meters. Atten could be anywhere. Niner didn't know him well enough yet to guess his movements, and it had been enough of a close shave for him not to spend much time contemplating the issue. Now he was worried that he, the sergeant, the man they looked to for leadership, had run for it without thinking of them, and that they knew it.
This is going to make a nice marker,
Fee said, staring up at the climbing smoke. It would be visible for a long, long way.
What did you expect me to do? Lie there and take a cannon round? No, Sarge. I thought you'd manage a double tap, though.
He laughed.
Better make sure nobody survived.
It was a remote chance, but speeders could be surprisingly robust. Niner and Fee walked back through the smoke, rifles ready. Droid parts were scattered across the scene of devastation. One scuttle-shaped faceplate staring up at the pall of smoke, as if in surprise.
They don't bounce much, then,
Fee said, and moved it with his boot.
Atten, Fee here. You there? Over?
Silence. Fee put his left gauntlet against his ear. Niner wondered if he'd now lost 2 men in as many days.
Atten here. Over.
Atten stepped out of the smoke, dragging his extra pack and a scorched hunk of metal that trailed a few wires and plugs. It looked like the speeder's onboard computer.
The pilot didn't bounce either. Here, help me get this strapped on again,
he said. It took both Fee and Niner to lift the pack and reattach it to his armor. A few days earlier, either of them could have managed it single-handedly.
We're too exhausted to be safe, Niner thought. Time we got out of here and got some rest.
I might be able to get something from this,
Atten said, indicating the charred metal box in one hand. It was the first time Niner had heard him sound remotely cheerful. Atten seemed to relate to gear better than he did to people.
Worth a try.
Niner took over the point position, and they struggled into denser cover. He glanced back and hoped the flames would burn themselves out. They didn't have a hope of outrunning a full-scale forest fire. But maybe that was the least of their problems. And if Darman was alive and anywhere near, he'd see their handiwork, and Niner hoped he'd recognize it as such. The squad had now left a couple of telltale marks of combat on the sleepy rural landscape. Whether it wanted it or not, Kilara was involved in the war.